Back down Mubarak masterminds here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Mimi Goodman with Juan Gonzalez here in New York, and we are in Cairo with Ahmed Shokr, who is an Egyptian newspaper editor who is right there looking out over Tahrir Square. Ahmed, can you hear me?
Thank you for having me.
Ahmed is on Sharif's line. Ahmed, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hi,
Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you with us.
Great.
So the latest news we have, the U.S. government putting pressure on Mubarak to resign. He tells ABC that he's tired of the presidency. The suggestion that we hear is that the vice president, who was just named by Mubarak, would take over. What is your assessment of what's happening?
Well, the vice president was on Egyptian television yesterday, and he gave a speech which I think was intended to diffuse this uprising, which has lasted for well over a week now. But I think his attempt has largely failed. As we can see today, tens of thousands of people are taking to the streets once again. And the problem now for the regime is that they're essentially not offering any major political concessions. I mean, yesterday in the vice president's speech, he did not vow to end the draconian emergency law that's been in place for the past 30 years. He said he would keep in place the current parliament, which was brought to power in elections that were marred by fraud and that lacked any independent supervision. His discussion of constitutional amendments was very limited. He didn't talk about articles which grant extensive and unchecked powers to the president or articles that govern judicial supervision over the elections. I mean, basically what he talked about yesterday was very limited amendments to the Constitution, in particular two articles that govern presidential eligibility and term limits. So this is far short of what the opposition has been demanding. And, of course, most importantly, the vice president did not meet the most important demand of the protesters, which is for the ouster of the current regime and a peaceful transition to a democratic government with a popular mandate. So the scenes that we see on the street today are likely to continue until people feel that they're getting real political change from the government, which has not happened so far.
Ahmed Shokr, this is Juan Gonzalez here, also in New York. I just wanted to ask you, in terms of the role of Suleiman, clearly the United States appears to be directing its efforts now, recognizing that Mubarak must go, to see Suleiman as the guy who will replace him and maintain U.S. presence and influence in the region. Can you give us a sense of how he is regarded, how Suleiman is regarded among the Egyptian people, and whether there's any distinction that they see at all between him and Mubarak?
Well, I think Omar Suleiman is someone that will make both the United States and Israel quite happy. He was the director of the Egyptian intelligence for almost 20 years. He basically ran the Egypt end of the U.S. renditions to torture program. He's the architect of Egypt's policy towards Israel and Palestine, and is largely responsible for Egypt's complicity in the blockade on Gaza, which has strangled the population of Gaza there for almost 5 years now. So he's someone that will make these powers quite happy. On the Egyptian side of things, of course, people see him quite differently. Omar Suleiman is a very close aide to Hosni Mubarak. He is someone who he's a senior leader from the military establishment that has been ruling this country for almost 60 years now. So I think many people are likely to see his rule as an extension of the Mubarak regime rather than a dramatic rupture. The real question is, will people then continue taking to the streets and oppose him in the way they did Hosni Mubarak, or will they will they let him rule for an interim period and trust that real democratic change will take place over the course of the next few months? Public opinion in that regard seems to be divided, I would say.
Vice President Omar Suleiman, who is only named that by Mubarak after the protests, has been very close, as you said, to the U.S., to the military, to the CIA, trained at the U.S. Special Warfare School at Fort Bragg, described as the CIA's point man in Egypt for the secret extraordinary rendition program, blamed the media for inciting the unrest. How is he different from Mubarak?
Well, he's... I mean, like you said, Amy, he's someone that's worked very closely with Mubarak, and he's a leader who's from the military establishment. I mean, the difference is his tremendous experience that he has in the intelligence services. He's a spy chief that was well respected by intelligence agencies around the world, especially in the United States. And, you know, I think there's real questions about whether he's a man who believes in democracy and whether he's the right person to undertake a democratic transition. I think, you know, right now there's a lot of focus amongst the opposition on Mubarak. He's sort of become a symbol of the regime that they want ousted as soon as possible. And if that happens, you know, large chunks of the population may settle temporarily for Omar Suleiman, but I think sooner or later, you know, many people will come to see, and many people are already saying this on the streets. I mean, you could hear this. You know, people chanting against Suleiman just as they're chanting against Hosni Mubarak. You know, many people will come to see that his rule is in fact no different, and that he comes from essentially the same system.
Ahmed Shoher, I want to thank you very much for being with us, a journalist who's been working out of Cairo for years now and all through this protest. He is an editor at the Egyptian daily newspaper Al Masri Al Yom. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. The Mubarak regime's violent crackdown has included the deliberate targeting of journalists covering the protest. News outlets, including Al Jazeera, CBS, ABC, Fox, CNN, BBC, Washington Post, New York Times, Australian Broadcasting, Danish TV 2 News, and Swiss television have reported assaults, intimidation, arrests, carjacking. On Thursday, ABC News correspondent Brian Hartman said he and 3 colleagues were abducted while driving from Cairo's airport. They were taken to a compound, each threatened with decapitation. Hartman says the group was let go only after a Lebanese camera operator working for ABC pleaded for mercy.
Some journalists were arrested or had their equipment seized after they were spotted covering the protests from buildings above the turmoil in the streets. In Washington, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton condemned the crackdown.
We condemn in the strongest terms attacks on reporters covering the ongoing situation in Egypt. This is a violation of international norms that guarantee freedom of the press, and it is unacceptable under any circumstances. We also condemn in the strongest terms attacks on peaceful demonstrators, human rights activists, foreigners, and diplomats.
The Committee to Protect Journalists has been carefully monitoring the crackdown on journalists. Frank, we only have 3 minutes. Frank Smythe is with us, this Committee to Protect Journalists Washington representative and journalist safety coordinator, who knows violence himself against journalists, was captured when he was in Iraq. Frank, are you there? Frank Smythe, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, Frank. Can you talk very quickly about what has happened to the journalists? You are citing the largest numbers of journalists attacked, assaulted, detained.
Yeah, very briefly, we've seen more than 100 cases of attacks on journalists, at least 30 detentions, 26 assaults, and 8 instances of equipment being seized. We've seen ruling party figures, plainclothes officers, and uniformed police going into hotels and detaining journalists under the pretext of protecting them. We've seen plainclothes agents as well as others working, it seems, at the behest of the Mubarak regime, attacking journalists in the streets. We've seen, and not only that, this is the worst case of the most blatant violence against the press that I've seen in my 24 years or so reporting and my 10 years at CPJ. I mean, this is somewhat reminiscent of what we saw in El Salvador back in the early 1980s. But this is even more blatant and more more widespread. Besides the journalists that you've mentioned, journalists from Romania have been attacked, Polish journalists have been attacked, journalists from Al Jazeera as well as Al Arabiya have been attacked, and government officials, as you indicated, have also made insinuations, including having a woman who had her face blocked out on screen, alleging that journalists were acting as Israeli spies and that they had been trained in Qatar, where Al Jazeera is based. And, of course, that's taking a level of conspiracy theory to a whole new level. So it seems that the Mubarak regime is attempting to literally unplug Egypt from the world by having shut down the Internet previously and cell phone towers, and is now trying to unplug the world from being able to watch and listen and hear what's happening in the streets of Cairo and other cities. I don't think it's going to work, but it's certainly the most widespread and blatant attacks against the press that I've seen in my career, and I think CPJ has witnessed.
And what about a group of journalists who apparently have just been released in the last hours?
That I haven't heard about. I've been checking the wires. I haven't seen anything on that, and CPJ New York is still looking into matters, so I haven't heard anything about that.
And what about the Mubarak regime's responsibility?
Clearly, the Mubarak regime is responsible. They are implementing a policy to eliminate witnesses to what is occurring. There is no doubt that government authorities are behind these attacks that have taken place in a number of different areas involving both uniformed agents as well as plainclothes agents, in addition to people that seem to be working at the behest of the government. We've also heard reports of government employees, people working at various government entities who are being told, if you want to keep your job, you have to go out in the street and attack not only anti-Mubarak protesters but also journalists. So there is no doubt in our minds that the regime is culpable for this violence against the press.
Frank Smythe, we want to thank you very much for being with us. He is the Washington representative and journalist safety coordinator of the Committee to Protect Journalists. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. When we come back, we go into Tahrir Square with Sharif Abdel Quddus. Stay with us.